welcome back again, for those of you that have been here the last couple of weeks. So we've got another treat in store for you tonight. We've got, now it's a slight change to the original programme, because I know that we made the change on the website about a week ago, but I don't think it was quick enough for us to tell you about it last week. So today we've got Shirley, Lacy and Chris Finden-Browne, and John McDermott is going to be here next week with Daniel Bresto. Okay. So we've just done that swap around, so hopefully, you know, that'll be fine. So anyway, I've known Shirley for quite a long time. She's another one of these famous people in the world of IT service management, and particularly ISO 20000. And she's going to be talking about in the age of digital and the cloud. And then Chris is going to be talking about moving on in service management. Okay, so I shall hand over to Shirley.
Okay, so trying to understand you. Maggie gave me a bit of background to who you all are from the previous weeks, but just so I can kind of understand, how many people you have done like an ITIL foundation course? Quite a few of you. How many of you working in media or digital space, online? Anyone working there? No? Good. And anybody working in development projects? Just a few of you. Okay. So, I'm going to just explain actually some examples from media, but it's really about what's happening at the moment in the industry. Massive change going on, and I think that can actually apply to any organisation. I know from the previous talks we have good grounding in service management, something about processes. I know that Ivan McFarlane, that was my co-editor for the Service Transition ITIL book, was talking about people. And some of what I'm going to talk today about is really actually about people and organisations. So I'm going to talk about introduction really to talk about, and the impact of digital. That's the online world, web services, and cloud, and the impact that has now or will have for many organisations. So how many of you are working with cloud services? Is that challenging?
Yes.
Yes? So I'm going to look at that. I actually work on international standards, as Maggie said, but only 20,000. So I was on the original British Standard 15,000 committee. Gone into the international arena. Recently we've been working with the cloud computing group on cloud standards, which is really interesting. As cloud comes about, I mean, we've had cloud services quite a long time. If you start getting standards on things, that means it's really here to stay. So it's quite interesting what's happening in that space. So I'll share some of that with you as well. I'm going to look at traditional and agile development methodologies and where that's going at the moment. And then looking at how we can adopt ITIL processes to enable project delivery into live services, and using both Agile and ITIL approaches together. So it's really something to kind of look out for. How many of you are involved in change coming through lifecycle into your live services? Quite a few of you. Probably different things happening, different ways that we take in services. And some of the principles I'll be talking about today will help with that as well. So, digital challenges. So, what is digital? Are people changing their business model at the moment using technology? Is your organisation doing that?
Yeah.
Yes, just one? Anybody else? Oh, you're staying still? Come on, guys. We need UK economy to be good. So really, in digital world, we're promoting an ever-changing and evolving business model. It's been massive in the last few years. If you haven't seen it already, I'm sure you'll see it in your careers. It's really easy to challenge the big players now. Some very small companies have grown very big, very quickly. And obviously there's plenty of opportunity there for us. As a service and cloud are real propositions now. Chris is going to talk about cloud, aren't you? I'm sure some of the speakers have already talked about that. So that's a massive change going on in the industry. And consumer and customer expectations are higher than ever before. So I think that's a real challenge, because as everybody uses technology outside their business, you've got things like bring your own device, people can do far more outside than they can sometimes actually achieve internally within their organisations. And the challenge is for us to keep up as an IT department. So if we want to actually take on that and embrace that digital transformation, this is a definition from the MIT Centre for Digital Business and Gemini Consulting Study from 2011. And it says an effective digital transformation programme is one that addresses the what, the intensity of digital initiatives in an organisation. So for those of you who've done ITIL, it's having a strategy for services for going digital and having a very clear strategy with the business and how technology will actually support that. And how can we actually face that challenge together with different cultures? So as mergers, acquisitions, reorganisations take place, you must all have experienced some quite cultural challenges in the last few years. Is that right? You knock two organisations together and what happens? I've just about sums it up, isn't it? So it is really a challenge when, particularly in service management, when you've kind of got your processes in place, you've got service management working well, and then you get some merger or two organisations together, and you come sliding back down the capability scale. It can be quite depressing for some organisations, and as we go global sometimes, what I notice at the international standards level, like in 20,000, there's something like 30 countries represented around the table, and what is really noticeable is the different levels of maturity of those different countries. So there's some more mature countries that we could work with quite well, but the less mature countries you have to work with in a particular way. So we've really got to understand the global supply chain for our IT services. And one of the discussions we've had in 20,000 is that actually you've always got a supply chain. You couldn't think of any case when you haven't really got IT somewhere. I think we came up with a cherry picker. Let's give you one example. So really, in 2011, only 1/3 of companies globally had an effective digital transformation programme in place. So if we embark on it without really working out what a strategy is, it's not going to be as effective as it could be, and we need to be. So there's some of the challenges we have. If we look at the cloud as well, then this has been really quite interesting. I've been working on cloud standards at the international level, and everybody's understanding of cloud in different countries, different commercial organisations has been very different. So the very first standard they produced is one on terminology, agreeing some terms for cloud computing, which is incredibly sensible actually. So I like that. But different stakeholders have very different expectations. It's those expectations from a service management perspective that we have to try and manage. So we have to try and understand people's different views. Cloud computing, security is an issue. So it's a big issue at the moment because it's stopping people from actually taking on cloud services. It's a big issue in the EU because they believe it's actually preventing adoption, and that will slow down our economic growth in Europe. There's an Atos client poll across public and private sector, and 14% of organisations have already started moving to the cloud. Some moving in a small way, some moving in a much bigger way. So it's not happened to you yet, it'll probably start to happen. And I'm sure, Chris, you've seen a lot of that happening, haven't you?
I'm surprised how low that 14% figure is. I'm sure I've seen other surveys which have a much higher rate of people at least exploring.
And I have another one here.
Right, okay, yeah.
And I think it's the definition actually. I think it's this, have you gone completely to the cloud, or actually have you gone hybrid? And I think it's what question do you ask that gives you a different result. So that's a very good point. So this is from Computer Weekly in October last year. So about 69% of organisations in the UK have adopted at least one cloud service. So that's probably more similar to the figure that you're used to. The other one was the EU, so we're obviously ahead as well. So I think the big thing here is actually it's hybrid IT, and that's one of the challenges for us as service management. You know, we went from the mainframe days to distributed network and PC computing, and it's the variety of different things that gives us variance, that makes it actually complex to manage, and it's getting those things under control that's the challenge. And now what's going to happen, and I'm seeing it happening a lot, as people move to the cloud, the business gets out their credit card, buys a cloud subscription. Brilliant. It's like going down the road and buying a PC from the PC world. So that's kind of the challenge that we face. So while here, I've just put up a definition, so you can come back to this. So what is cloud computing? So this is based on the international standard, which is currently in our committee draft. It should be going to publication this year. So it's an approach in which infrastructure and software resources are provided by an external vendor or an internal IT department, so it's either over the internet, and the second line here, it's a paradigm for enabling network access, some very big words here, to scalable and elastic pool of shareable, physical or virtual resources with on-demand self-service provisioning and administration. Some big words in there, and all got a great amount of meaning to us in service management. So, ITIL talks about scalable, doesn't it? Those of you who remember it from your course. So in service design, we develop scalable, flexible services, an elastic pool of shareable physical or virtual resources. ITIL talks something about virtualization and virtual servers, but it's the mixture, I think, that's really quite important. With on-demand self-service provisioning. So ITIL started to look at that. So 2007, we saw a lot coming in with request fulfillment and self-service. But now it's the customer and the users getting out their credit cards and doing it themselves, if you like, plus our internal users. And it's the administration of all of that that changes. It changes the way we work. It changes the way we deliver our services and provision our services. So I've tested that out with kind of quite a few of our clients that are doing cloud, and they say that's a really good definition as well, so that's pretty good. Examples of the resources are service operating systems, so it's the whole technology stack, if you like, networking, software, storage equipment. So it actually also in the standard we defined all the different as a service. So you've got communications as a service, software as a service, data as a service, all the different kind of standard terms that we can use. There will be more, but what they wanted to do is standardise on a core set. So that is quite useful. And the other very useful thing they've done, but I haven't put it on here, but I can send it to you afterwards if you like, is some key roles. So we have a cloud service customer, a cloud service provider, a cloud broker, and some roles in what they actually do, which I think is very useful. So I've got some case studies from the media sector. There's no one here in the media sector, so that was a bit disappointing. But what we'll do is use it as a generic kind of case, really. So I'm sure some of you can imagine you used to read the newspaper. Some of you may still do. Some of you may have gone across to an iPad or reading things on your mobile phone. Anyone doing that? Okay. Some people still attach their newspaper. It's a massive change, isn't it? In terms of provisioning the service, it's a massive change as well. So that's the kind of thing we're doing. But I don't think some of this is new, it's just a big transformation. I was working at the BBC in the 90s when they went from analogue to digital. That was a big transformation. So transformation comes in different forms, and some of the principles apply. Okay, so that's kind of what you need to imagine, really. Okay, some of the challenges that we get when you go undergo massive change. So risk of poor quality for external customers, in this case, because you've got subscription services or online retail services. Silo working is ineffective, support costs increase. ITIL is very good at trying to address that. It says, don't work in silos. But silos pop up when technology changes and big change happens. And as Gary said earlier on, you get chaos. Is that right? So we tend to go back to a silo way of working if we're not careful. There's a risk of IT teams being unresponsive, and there is a lot of case studies at the moment where CIOs are actually losing their jobs because you've got people in the digital space, the marketing people, delivering product very fast. The IT department seems to be non-responsive, although they've got a big challenge on. But unless you actually get that communicated, it seems as if IT is not responding. So if any of those were in your ITIL, that balance between stability and responsiveness is all important here. And I think one of the key things is creating a shared view of the world. We've got very different cultures, so we've got kind of enterprise IT, which is kind of looking after robust finance regulated systems very often. So they actually need to be risk averse. And you put in there kind of digital products, people have to get to market quickly. You put in kind of new startup teams. Is there going to be a clash there? And it's those kind of things we have to start to deal with, really. So we have to look together, working across the products. So if you've got a product on an iPhone, it's like an application, and working with that across the service life cycle as well. So traditional waterfall approach, go through the life cycle, and then we deliver something that's really well tested. We don't get any incidents, so we get a few that we can manage. Nice world. And I think actually, as we get these kind of technology changes, and then it kind of levels off for a while, and then you get another peak. But we do get to stable sometimes, and I see that in organisations. The problem with going to stable, a place where you can manage that stability, is everybody gets fixed in their ways of working. And people that probably 5 years earlier would have been quite proactive in responding, actually quite happy and stable. So it's interesting looking at that. I'm going to talk about an agile approach now. So what we've got is evolving business requirements, and we've got business requirements coming in here into a product backlog. So it's a way of prioritising the functionality that we want in our products, our software products, that our end customers, be they internal or external, will be using. We do it in sprints. Wonderful words, sprint is terrifying. We'll just sprint. We deliver in sprints. Is that an advantage to that? Big advantages, we get customer feedback very early on. So if you're actually working with software teams, one of our consultants was working at Harris Publications, and he was putting in, taking basically Harris Publications online. And they used to go down into the Starbucks underneath their offices and just ask people what they thought of it. Brilliant, fantastic feedback. Very fast way of delivering, getting out there with the customers. But they were able to do that by evolving. And the whole of the agile approach is actually, we don't understand when we start off what people really need. And we're just evolving into a solution that really works. Now, the problem with that is we're releasing a lot more. So the impact and the load on the service team can be big, depending on what is in each sprint. But the good thing is we're responding to what the customer really wants. So the way that Agile works, you have user stories, and you work out the user interface. So it's an example of a technology stack here. You design your web services, third-party services, and data services underneath. Now, some people think that the user cases here, the user stories, are just for the customer or the end user. But they're not, they're for us in service management as well. So we should be getting in there and actually explaining what we need. Doing it in sprints. Now, if we don't get in there and actually have our requirements understood by those teams, what happens when we go live? Sorry? We can't support it, and that's what it's starting to happen. So, in some of the organisations we work with, you see that starting to happen. And it's like the service degrades over time. So really, what I'd ask you to do is kind of after, talk tonight, is to really just have a look what's going on and see if you can see things that perhaps you didn't see before. And I think that's sometimes we don't see things that we don't know about. It's very easy when you've been working in kind of one type of service for a number of years, you can see things that are going on. But when something new starts to happen, you don't always understand what's happening to you. So we get the user story, which is kind of really very a summary about what we're actually doing. So you can have a user story for a new service request model. It would be a very simple thing to do. So self-service on demand, we need to get in there understanding how we're going to actually offer those new service request models. So where did Agile come from? Well, it's been around for a number of years. It was kind of revamped in 2003. So it's really set of software development practices, but it's also moved into project management. So the whole approach, Agile, lean ways of working, has been adopted by a lot of organisations. So it focus on delivery through evolution, an iteration of the requirements, as we've just seen. It promotes testing and learning and adaptive planning. So understanding we can't plan everything up front. We've got to change our plans as we go through. And ITIL talks about that as well. Certainly in transition, it talks about being flexible enough to change your plans. It encourages prototyping, flexibility, rapid response to change and learning. Now, where have we seen that in ITIL? Where do we see learning and growth?
Continuous service improvement.
In continual service improvement. Big overlap there. This has terrified me when I first heard about it. Success is often measured through velocity. So I was kind of had this vision of a kind of a fast racing car going around the track with no brakes. But it's really about what's the velocity of the iterations that you can do, and is the velocity of the learnings that you do. So it's not terrifying when you understand it. It's essential that owners and operators of the product are involved throughout the entire life cycle. So Agile is saying the same thing as ITIL is saying. It's just that they tend to use the word product and we use the word service. And let's say we've had a lot of debate with ITIL. There was product introduced in 2007 with ITIL, we took it out in 2011. Is there any difference between product and service? Depends on your perspective. So, but unfortunately, language gets very much in the way sometimes. And having worked on 20,000, one of the reasons that 20,000 came about was it talked about product quality, not service quality, from 9001. And people in IT weren't applying it to service. So I think, there's some interesting things about language there. But anyway, hang on to this throughout the entire life cycle. Right, this is the Agile Manifesto. Has anyone seen this before? So these are four values in the middle of the slide. So individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Focus on people, talking together, working together. Working software over comprehensive documentation. That could be terrifying, couldn't it? know, I see some terrible situations when people have to follow like 30-page standard operating procedures to recover a survey. You know, that's too long. So there's a balance with documentation. And really what it's saying is, however much you document something, nobody will read it. I'm one of those people that doesn't read things. My husband does, he's an engineer. He always reads the manual. So I'm just one of those people that prefers the working software. Customer collaboration over contract negotiations. That's really saying, you know, it's better to engage with your customers and really understand what they want, have a working relationship with them, than actually going into, I suppose that's the trouble with SLAs really, if you use them in the wrong way. And responding to change over following a plan. Have you ever worked on a project where everybody wants to follow the plan even though you don't think it's the right thing to be doing? Yeah? Maggie's nodding. Lots of experience over here. I had a lovely case when I was working at Vodafone many years ago with 3G. And basically they were all following the plan. They actually wanted to get to this end goal in June, having designed the 3G network. And somebody came out of a meeting in May and said, we're designing a bicycle and we need a sports car. So that's the kind of thing that happens. So it really is important that we understand what we're going to deliver.
Shirley, can you? I'm interested in the interpretation of the word over there. You know, is it 100% you do the left-hand side, or is there some kind of meeting somewhere, not quite in the middle?
I think there is a meeting. I think this is very left-sided, and ITIL's probably right-sided. And you put the two together, you can get a really good solution. This is because, from a traditional approach, you weren't getting enough change early on in the life cycle. Because if you follow these are the things that were happening. So, I think it's also about how we engage ourselves from the right, your right here, how we engage in the left-hand side of the life cycle through user stories and service management use cases, really. But this is important, I think, to understand where people are coming from, not to be terrified by it, but to understand how we manage it. So if we understand the perspective of the Agile approach, it will be easier to manage and work out strategies to deal with it. So that's good ITIL. Now, common areas for Agile and ITIL, and this is something I never ceases to amaze me when I work on standards. How you get new communities come in. So I was actually took service management into the software and system engineering community. Then business process outsourcing came in, and then we had the cloud come in as well. And people always think they're different. And I think it's really important that we find common ground to share. So Agile and ITIL share continual service improvement or continual improvement. Problem management is crucial for both. Getting to the real root cause of things and fixing those. Change management, managing change throughout the entire life cycle. And really soon deployment in Agile projects. You already had some talks, I think, so you've had continuous integration, different ways of working with DevOps, and some of the smarter techniques and the tools that are now around to actually help with that should actually help and make things better for us. In my experience, that they usually do. So obviously there's some common areas there with ITIL. These are just some of the common areas, but some of the most important areas, I think. And then you've done ITIL, many of you, just a reminder if you haven't. So we've got to build our service management capability, if you like, even from where we are today, improve it. So we've got the right organisational capability to manage the changes that are coming to us. It doesn't have to be agile or digital or cloud. Just look at the changes that are coming towards you, and are you set up to do it? Or do you need to actually develop your support organisation or your service management team so they can actually manage better with what's coming? I think sometimes we don't plan enough that organisational change that we need. And a service, a means of delivering value to customers. So I don't think anybody in the Agile world would disagree with that. By facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific costs and risk. That's still really important for us. But Agile teams also want to deliver that. They just use different words. So, just walking through the service lifecycle. So we start off with the business requirements coming in at the top, the service strategy. The key things coming out of strategy are the objectives from the business requirements. So what's the objectives of the services that we're offering? And that will include the products and the functionality, along with the service that we're offering. What constraints and resources do we have? I had a lovely example the other day where a whole new project went in, with a whole new technology, and there was no support organisation at all. Brilliant. Now the great thing about that is, when that's a lovely story, isn't it? It was so noticeable, they didn't do it again. But you know, that's what you've got to look at. If you've got constraints, if you've only got fixed about support resources, you can only support certain things. And we get strategies and policies there. So it's very important that we work together with the business to actually develop those strategies. I think sometimes I see quite ad hoc approaches from senior leadership teams in terms of strategy. So some organisations do it really well. For some reason, a lot of CIOs don't like to write things down. What happens if you don't write things down? You can't communicate it, so that's quite a challenge too.
Can't be held accountable.
Sorry?
Can't be held accountable if they can't.
Absolutely, yes, I think that's true. Anyway, from there we go into service design, and that's a crucial point, really. So you've got solution design there, we've got the service requirements being defined, we've got architectures and standards, so if you've got a new cloud or digital world coming in, you've got to pay attention to that. And the key thing here, I think, is the service design package. And I'll come on to a bit more about that in a moment. Then we come through service transition, where we're really changing the organisation and our services. But we should design that in service design. And that's a crucial thing there. And we should be updating our knowledge in configuration management as we come through. On the left-hand side there, we've got service knowledge management, which is this logical repository of all our knowledge. And then when we get into service operation, then it's when we've got the live operational services. Now, if we come through service design and service transition properly, we should be able to deliver our service to the agreed targets. And the important thing here is we've got service realisation there. That's when we deliver the benefit back to the business. That's when the external customers can use their subscription service. That's when our internal customers can do their business activities more efficiently and effectively. In continual service improvement, this is where we really do need to work together. So we're going to take baselines and benchmarks. And I think that measurement between the two areas is fundamentally important. You've got defects and incidents, slightly different language, but they mean the same thing. People can't work in the way they wanted to. And improvement actions and plans that may well be shared.
Have you ever seen an example where service?
Sorry?
Where service operation is done by your customer. You put it in place.
Absolutely.
And then hand it over and they actually run the service themselves.
Yes. Well, actually, think about us as a small business. Actually, that's what we do. Yes. Do we do it on large? We don't do it on large scale. But what 20,000 does is have many internal groups supporting that service. So you develop a service, and then it's actually not just the IT department anymore that helps to support that service. There's maybe facilities, lots of different parts of the organisation, and marketing as well. So you've got to understand that. Certainly, so working on one customer at the moment, they've got quite an unusual set of departments involved in delivering that end-to-end service. So the service design package, I won't go through this in detail now, but I think this is fundamentally important. If we can get project teams to deliver a service design package that's comprehensive and ITIL, then you start to make things better. Instead of working from the back of the life cycle through transition and then just hoping the service design will work. Because it won't unless we get in there and help it. So, Agile and ITIL working together. So, this is a consultant who works in the Agile space, and I put this together. So, Agile without ITIL. Basically, they've got to establish the base capabilities. You know, if you've got an IT department that's working well, the Agile team doesn't need to work so hard. And it's the same really for projects there. There's a risk with Agile, if you don't use it with ITIL, that service operation isn't taken into account. And then when it goes live, things go, what we call pear-shaped. And you get lots of incidents. So that's not good for the Agile team. They don't want that either. Okay. Cost, quality and time estimates are less accurate. I think that's actually quite important, because although you want to kind of deliver change, not just follow the plan, you actually want to do it in the best possible way. And you can't estimate as well if you haven't got kind of an understood service organisation that you're delivering towards. There's an increasing dependency and risk with the change. That's not a good thing. And you're likely to focus on utility improvement over warranty. And I see this time and time again. And it happens for about 2 years. I see organisations, they kind of have what they call maintenance groups. They start fixing things. And then over time, they just gradually don't worry about performance or maintenance. What happens after 2 years? What have you got? Unhappy customers, unhappy users. So I think that's the bottom one there, to me, is the key thing. So for those of you who've forgotten, utility in ITIL is where we actually deliver the value to the business. The user can use the functionality to improve their business activities. And the warranty is really the guarantee that the service will be there for them to use. So it'll be available, it'll be secure as well. That's quite a challenge in today's world. It'll have enough capacity and it'll be available. So Agile with ITIL working together gives us a lot of benefits. So we've got an established service management capability. And in my experience, if you've got a good service management capability, proactive service organisation, they'll be responsive to change. They'll be able to measure what's happening and have a good communication with the projects and the development teams. The problem is that Agile projects need to deliver within the constraints, the rules that you define for the service organisation. How do you get them to do that? Sometimes with an awful lot of difficulty. So sometimes you've got to have a strategy to actually work together, or a policy, some principles in some organisations to actually make that happen. It enables quicker delivery into live, it should do, and reduced ongoing cost to the service, and that's in everybody's interest. If you save money, you can add more value to the business. Better coordination of Agile projects, and more effective and efficient working from concept through to delivery. And you improve value through creating both utility and warranty. Through good performance plus good functionality, the service is there to use. So if we look at that's like an Agile life cycle there, and that's the ITIL life cycle. And what we would normally do, you look at the two life cycles that are going on. They're two different worlds, and you've just got to define the control points and the crossover points. And I think, very importantly, the engagement points. Where do we engage and really understand each other's perspectives? And we can do that through user stories, but we've got here, oh sorry, I didn't need to do that. Hold on. Okay, so what we've got here is pushing back. Instead of just living in operation, we're pushing back and saying service transition involvement, service operational involvement in service design. Very important. And I think the key thing is early life support, where you've got a very fast mini CSI project really going on. And that's a place that we can come together and improve things. And I think it's a place where if we work on it really well, then we get people to work together, so they learn. It's something like kind of the post-implementation review that happens after the end of a project and nobody ever goes back to it. It's far better to do it at the time. And it really works. So takeaways. Here's a few takeaways for you. And things that I've already said. I think we need to develop a shared view and language. Focus on delivering value to customers. Everybody wants to do that, so actually it's a really common ground. So just focus on that. Communication. Embrace agile communication methods. Really funny. One of our customers recently, she had a long transition checklist, and the agile team wanted it shorter, as they do. So what she did, and it was very acceptable to them, she just grouped things. So instead of having 30 lines, she had 10 rows. Same information in it, but it was more digestible. So presentation is all important. Obviously, it's had the right stuff in there as well. Engaging between the teams is really important. Working together across the life cycle. Operations staff need to get involved, and ITIL says that. But as people go up the different the intermediate courses, you know, they learn over time, but they forget quite easily. So it's really, I would really recommend that. And the Agile team needs to be part of service design. And people talk about DevOps. I think DevOps isn't the panacea answer, but what it really is operations people getting involved in those projects. And I think early life support is just fundamentally important. Okay, so thank you.
Okay, we've got time for a couple of questions, if people have got questions now, and then we can have some more later. Any questions?
Just one on that last slide, Shirley. You had Agile would be part of the service design. Would you not think there'd be pushback with people going, oh, no, that's design, you can't do build in there, you can't do stuff, you have to just think about it. Is that something you would get?
No, the Agile teams I've seen actually want to get involved in everything. They just didn't realise that they did.
Well, until they were told.
Well, until you discuss it, so you actually workshop and you start to engage and talk about it. You say, well, are you interested in this? And they say, well, yes, I'd like to learn about that and do it. They're actually very proactive in my experience. But that always depends on the culture of your organisation for them. So that's my experience, but I think that wouldn't necessarily be universally true. You've probably got different challenges from what you were saying before.
Well, yeah, we're working with the MOD currently, but they're not generally the most agile.
No, and that's
there's
pretty...
any other MOD bots in here, but...
And I think there, you know, I just take some of the things from here. I think I just take those 4 things like CSI, corporate management, change, releasing deployments. Just start focusing on some of those things. And service design with the, you know, both utility and warranty. You can't do everything at once. Hopefully here we've just got a few kind of key things that you can start to hang on to. All of these things really work well.
Any more questions?
There seems to be a strong message here to actually take a project appeal and do something and learn from it, rather than what I see in the MOD space is that they do lots of analysis and not too sure, a bit more analysis, and I think never quite happens. My experience is you're better on just doing something with a pilot that's low risk and then learning from it, and then, you know, winning some hearts and minds along the way.
I think that's really interesting. That's the kind of this the lean startup Californian approach.
Yeah.
And it's also, Chris is going to talk a bit about COVID as well, and I was always quite pleased that COVID said exactly that. So, I was a software developer, so I suppose at heart, I know that it works. If you deliver stuff, documenting it doesn't do it for everybody.
No.
I think it does it for 50% of the world, but not the other 50%. So I think the best practice is supporting that approach. So
This isn't just a way for safe developers documenting anything, though, is it?
no, actually, no. I think that's a good point. I think to be really careful what you document. And I think what we're absolutely falling at, sorry, everybody, is actually when we write a document, we don't understand who we're writing it to very often. And I see this in an ISO 20000 world, where you actually have to understand your target audience and then write the document accordingly. We don't do that enough. And if we did, and we adopted some good publication practices, we would do better. We would have to write less. You're nodding, is that right? You agree with that? Good.
Right, okay. Thanks very much, Shirley. So now we've got Chris talking to us about moving on in it.
Have to swap over. Oh, great, Richard, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Let me introduce myself. My name is Finden-Browne. I'm sorry for disrupting the programme. It's my fault that I'm on this week rather than next week. I've got a customer who's threatening that I need to be in Japan in a week today. It's still not absolutely finalised, and I'm not sure there'll be any flights left when I hear the final decision, but there we go. So this is a presentation trying to make you think about, well, where do we go with service management? And I was going to ask similar sort of first audience involvement questions that Shirley did. So I've sort of got one left. Is there anyone in the room who thinks that service management has no part in their current job? Okay, can you just tell me what your role is?
I'm a campaign manager.
Campaign. So are you on the business side?
I am, yeah, sort of. When the engineering department wants to split me, I'm business department. So,
Okay.
as I like to tell them, I'm just brighter.
Well, thank you for being the sort of victim I pick on there. And the reason for that, well, first of all, I need to, my colleagues in the Service Management Specialist Group Committee are keen that we move on with sort of social media, so please make a note of that hashtag, and you know, you're welcome to make some comments about this evening or add comments in future with related to service management. So I've worked in IBM for 30-something years, and I focused on originally systems management and now service management for about the last 25. And so I'm going to pass across some of my views on that. So if I focus on the left-hand side first, I think the key thing is that, as we've all seen, IT continues to move forward. Shirley's talked about some of those aspects, and I'll come back to it. In fact, quite a few of my messages are the same kind of thing, but hopefully said in a complementary rather than repeating fashion. The key point is that there are some fundamentals that are always there. I talk about, you know, the laws, the technology changes, but the laws of physics don't. And for me, one of these sort of golden rules is that whenever you get a technology change, it's a bit like when you get a new application. Release 1 focuses on functionality. Release 2 focuses on fixing the performance blockages that they didn't realise that they had. And Release 3 helps you manage it better. You know, service management, unfortunately, always lags the technology changes, which is good for us, those of us who have a career in service management, because we're always going to be needed. But that does bring some challenges. And so what I was trying to illustrate, have I got a pointer? Oh, it doesn't really show up very well. And the reason for asking the question is, I want to convince anyone who doesn't already think this, that if you're involved in IT, then you have a role to play in service management, whether that's part of your job title or whether it's nothing to do with your job title. You can't be successful unless you think about some service management issues. And I like to use some analogies which aren't always in IT, but another one is if you think about service management challenges, imagine you are running your home computer network. You might have, these days, 4 PCs, some iPads, and a wireless router, and all that kind of thing. You have exactly the same challenges there that you have in a large enterprise. They're just at a different scale. And it may be that you have to think about each item for a few seconds, whereas it takes a work group that takes 3 months in a large enterprise. But fundamentally those same issues apply. And that's what I'm going to take you through in my agenda. So I'm going to give you, come back to the product versus service one, is my first chart. We haven't rehearsed this in any way, and where I think service management fits. And then I'm going to take you through what I think are, what I call their patterns of development, or maybe I should let you see the chart, Maggie, sorry. 4 waves of how you need to approach service management. Shirley said you can't do everything at once, and that is absolutely true. So you need to understand classic consulting, organised common sense, understand where you are today and be realistic about what you need to do tomorrow. So I'm going to take you through what I think are some patterns in which you could approach service management. And then just some, again, some simple consulting tools for working out where am I, how can I build my case, and how you can promote the case for the benefits of service management. One of the pots of gold at the end of the rainbow is getting a good business case for service management. I will tell you, you're always going to struggle with that, but you can at least start to build the picture. Once you've got this sort of digital computing that IT is the core of the business now, rather than an add-on, then you can come back to the overall effect on the business. And if we have time, I've got a couple of charts about COVID. Has COVID been covered in any of the previous sessions? If you have time and interest, we can come to that. Please do stop me as we go along, otherwise I will talk for too long, probably. Okay, so here's my product and service chart. So a good friend of mine told me, if you're going to take me through a scenario, use the trucking business. Don't use IT. Well, this one you can probably guess by the name at the bottom right. This is a coffee shop. Right? So we can immediately see that the product here is a cup of coffee, and there might be some croissant or something else like it. But fundamentally, if that's all you had there and it was do it yourself, then people are not going to go into the service management cafe for this. You have to wrap around that the kind of services, the preparing, the take, well, beg your pardon, we probably start at the top, don't we? You always go, you either go left to right or right to left. Here we're going to go top down. You go to one station, you place your order, you move right or left, and then you pick up the things that you've ordered. And fundamentally, what the customer is interested in is those things that they can see. They're not really interested in what happens behind the scene, in this picture to the right-hand side, which is what happens when the coffee maker needs some servicing. We need to get that back up and running as quickly as possible, or have a simple replacement we can get out of the back room and put in without any disruption to the service. What service management is about is not just the things that are visible to the customer, it's all those back-end things. And that's, I think, the link to the Agile piece that you're talking about, is helping the Agile team understand that you need to go through that complete set of scenarios. It's not just the core functionality, it's all those other things that you need to get the service running that are fundamental. I was trying to think of an analogy, another analogy, and some of you may remember when Terminal 5 opened at Heathrow. What was all the big news in the week after Terminal 5 opening? Baggage. So, they hadn't quite got that right. It fundamentally worked, and if anyone's been through Terminal 5 since, it's absolutely the best terminal you could go to. But they didn't get that right first time, and that was a key problem for them. The second point in this, before I go too far with it, is this bit about the boundary between different providers. That's an increasing phenomenon in whatever size of IT organisation you're in, and it applies particularly in the cloud piece. More and more of these pieces up here are now sort of hidden from the user. The user or the customer doesn't see the difference, but we now have a much more fragmented supply chain, and each time you introduce this service boundary, then you've got some more considerations to think about, and I'll come back to that when we go to some cloud examples. Does that make sense? Okay, so what is service management? Well, it's a very simple picture, but I always think about it that you've got this service layer between the system, and underneath that you've got the resources, and at the other side of it you've got the business. So the customer view is the tip of that pyramid. The business division senior manager who's commissioning a service from IT has that very simple view. And they don't care that here we've got tens of thousands of resources that have to work in a coordinated fashion. We are, if you like, here called the moment of truth, or sometimes it's called the line of visibility. All of that is, if you like, not visible to the customer. So how can we, if we're responsible for putting all this together, start to think about making it happen? So let me take you through some core concepts. And the first one is, we found a very simple model like this is useful. You have to represent your service as an offering to your users. Underneath that, you have to work out how do you provide it. Right? So coming back to Terminal 5, all the way that the baggage work is not visible to the users at all. They just expect it to work. And if you like, the foundations of that we found useful are the familiar set of organisation, process, technology and data. We need to think about all of those aspects. So if I come back to my line of visibility, the analogy I like to think of is an iceberg. Right? The customer can see what's above the waterline. How much of an iceberg is above the waterline? Anyone know that figure?
1/3.
I'm sorry?
1/3.
1/3 is above the waterline. Any other?
1/5.
1/5?
10%.
10%. We're going down. Anyone going to go any further? I think the true answer is 7% is above the waterline. 93% is below the waterline. And I think that's valid. We have, if I can get this to work, we have somewhere in the middle of service offering is what's visible to the customer. All of the rest below that is what we in the delivery side need to worry about, and the customer is not interested in. Quite frankly, they expect it to work. But I think this is a useful picture to understand that. So just to expand on those items, I think they're fairly obvious. The service provision is probably the key bit. We have to work out when in self-service they order a new Intel image as a virtualized machine. Well, what's all the workflow that needs to happen, not just to give it to them, but also to register it and work out how we add it to the support rotor so that when incidents come in, it goes to the right team and all that kind of stuff.
How do you get meaningful differentiation of the service offer? One of the big issues that we get is our customer very often says, "Oh yeah, I'd like to buy that from you as a service," and it's very difficult for us to offer anything that's different to anybody else. So that one of the factors that seems to have come out is it's harder to differentiate yourself from anybody else. So it used to be that you got some kudos for having sufficient engineering depth. You could sort of guarantee that it would work because you've got enough resources to do that. Now it's almost like people are saying, well, that stuff will just happen over there. How do you then offer something that's innovative, that's given the credit that it's due, when it's just a bland sort of reskinning of cloud-based service?
So I think I've got two parts to that. Is if you're the in-house organisation, you're clearly not going to compete with, for example, Amazon Web Services or anything like that. The key bit is all these bits around the edge that I was trying to describe about what happens when something goes wrong. Is there a clear channel of communication that users will simply understand? How are they going to handle dramatic growth in capacity and make sure that that's properly approved. It's all those bits around that as a service that is more than just the core technology. If you try and compete on, can we provide a virtual image faster than somebody in the marketplace, I don't think you're going to win, because that's what they specialise in. What you specialise in is what makes it work for your business. And we'll come back to that in a minute with my cloud example. If anyone's interested, I mean, there was a paper that we published in the Systems Journal in 2007 which expanded on this and defined the next level of entities behind each of these. So what are the 4 ways that I think we're going to go through? Well, the first one I've called is Foundation, and it's equivalent to, in ITIL version 2 speak, service support. Anyone from ITIL version 2 days? There's a couple of old hands, judged by the hair colour, maybe, that's not being unkind. And Shirley talked about some of these fundamentals, which is to do with problem and change, and, well, change, I guess, yes, change was in that one, and incident and so on. And I'll touch on that. The reason it's there is, these days, hardly anyone has a green field with service management. You've always got something there, but if you haven't got that fundamental right, you're going to be in trouble. Once you've got that working, then you can focus on, again, ITIL version 2, the service delivery piece. And this is, I'm going to touch on that more in terms of, again, the Agile lead, the link with development. Come back to that. And then wave 3 is almost coming back to that question, how we represent our service in meaningful terms to the business. And that goes along with what I'm calling delivery model flexibility, which is to do with outsourcing, multiple providers, and cloud. Come back to that. Okay, so this is a slightly complicated diagram from our formal model of IT to focus on that core bit. And essentially we're saying the actual service, we need to have monitoring data which goes to some kind of event management system which handles most activities on an automated basis. The analogy is driving a car. So if I drive my car and, very topical at the moment, I hit a pothole and the wheel jags to the left or to the right and I have to adjust. In ITIL terms, is that an event, an incident, or a problem? Incident? It's an event. It's an event. Your car is designed that you as a driver can adjust. The fact that you've hit a pothole is a fact of life, and if you need to be able to do that, otherwise you're not going to pass your driving test. Similarly, you're driving along and the low fuel warning light goes on. Is that an event, an incident, or a problem?
That's an event.
It's an event. It's part of the design of the normal operation of the service, and you need to have that allowed for. But if you then get a red warning light, well, you know the answer. We now have an incident. It means you contact your service organisation, and it might eventually become a problem. We don't yet know. And so a critical thing with the size of infrastructure we have these days is to have that automated event side so that we reduce the number of things which become incidents. And then our service team, if you like, second level support, will have a whole series of workarounds, change the fan belt. Do we still have fan belts in cars? I'm sure I'm non-technical I am. But I can just about relate to that.
Yes, but they don't drive fans.
I'm sorry?
Yes, but they don't drive fans anymore.
Oh, okay, right. Thank you. That's the kind of thing that you might be good at doing it yourself, or in my case, I certainly go to the garage and get them to do it. That's a kind of incident. And you want, again, the vast majority of incidents to be resolved by your support organisation, and only a few things then become problems, and that's when you have the link to change management, where you're making a sort of more fundamental change in the way you're working. And I call this the sort of foundation, because the first thing you do when you go into an organisation is understand, is this working well? Because that's fundamentally what gives you the service quality, at least on a day-by-day basis. Right, so let's assume we have that. What's the next stage? Oh, there's just a summary of those key pieces. The next page is how we now move service management beyond the operations organisation. And for me, this was one of the really big things that ITIL version 3 did compared with ITIL version 2. Before version 3, if you tried to talk service management to development teams, they weren't interested. What version 3 did was you could start to build the case that everybody needs to be involved, and that you don't have this classic scenario of throwing things over the wall from development thought that the operations were idiots because they didn't understand the system. Similarly, operations thought development hadn't thought about how you run things. So it's back to the sort of agile link that Shirley was talking about. Now, part of the difficulty here, she touched upon by talking about defects and problems. Right? One of the key issues here is an organisation and sort of cultural issue that development teams fundamentally work in a different way than people on the delivery side of the organisation. We've got project organisation versus continuous delivery. And so what we need to do is bring those together. And this is a rather complicated chart, but what it's trying to represent is, suppose we've had some operational monitoring which has resulted in a problem being registered eventually after we've been through incident management. That might be something that hits the development side. What we're starting to see is that we can have linkage between the operational service desk tool and the way that the developers work naturally in their development workbench. Part of the reason why development wasn't so keen to get involved in this was they were being asked to use a whole different set of terminology compared with what they're used to on the development side. So we've actually got in the marketplace tools which allow, once that problem has been allocated to the development side to build a resolution plan and track it, you can get automated update back to the service desk tool, so that the operations side, without hassling the development team, has got an automatic view of the progress of that problem. And so it comes back to those 4 pillars I had in my model, that we're starting to use the technology piece and the data pieces to improve the overall service that's given to the enterprise. Another example is you start to be able to get transaction monitoring from the live service, and you can feed those transaction data over to the development side so that they can do simulation of if they're adding some functionality or changing the way a transaction works. You're getting a kind of round trip between development and operations that improves that overall service. Okay, so the next stage, I think, is what I call the business focus or understanding the services. And this is, again, what another thing that ITIL 3 did, which was bring ITIL out of the operations side up into the earlier stages of the life cycle and give the service management people the right to sit in the design stage and even in the strategy stage to understand the implications of doing things one way or the other. And it all comes back to, I think, almost the points that you were making, understanding the service that you're giving to the users and having that holistic view, like I had with my coffee shop example at the beginning, of what are the full set of implications that are driven by adopting that service. And once you have that proper set of service portfolio, service catalogue, then you've got a chance of developing the service capabilities in parallel with that core functionality that I was talking about earlier on. So a trivial example, because a lot of us tend to use work in process terms, is to think about, that you might have multiple processes involved in an end-to-end scenario of delivering a service. So in this example, we want to go to a restaurant and have a meal. You can recognise the fairly familiar stages. We set the table in advance, the customer arrives, we welcome them, we offer the choice and take the order, we prepare the order, we serve it, and hopefully not too often go back and bother and ask them, is everything all right? I was in the States recently and you just get fed up with people asking you that question. But what you can recognise is in that end-to-end service there are multiple processes involved. And the reason that's important is if you think about the delivery organisation, it's easier to describe to the delivery organisation a substandard set of things in their toolkit in process terms. And increasingly, if we follow my wave 2 example, the development side. So understanding changes or thinking about capacity or thinking about availability or security, whatever it might be, is more easily described in building blocks that are processed. But what you need to do is sort of put them together and think about that set of services. Right, so I'm rushing on because I probably want to spend a little bit more time on what I'm calling the delivery model flexibility. And this is really in 2 areas. The first one is to do with outsourcing or multi-sourcing or particularly service integration. Is anyone here involved in an IT organisation that has multiple service providers that are part of their setup? Yeah, I think it's increasingly common. I don't know what John McDermott is going to say next week about service integration. The project I'm currently on is a service integration one. And this is, we see this pattern all the time. So, complicated chart. The orange piece is the enterprise. And most enterprises will have some retained IT side. Usually it's in application development and maintenance rather than the operations side. There will be a whole series of service providers, perhaps split by tower, perhaps split by geography. And if you're a global organisation, and the approach that is increasingly common, the UK government calls it SIAM, Service Integration and Management, is that you need to have the green bit, which is the kind of service integration piece. Now you can argue, well, hang on a minute, that's just what we always used to do within our organisation. But the reality is someone like the UK government, where they've had outsourcing for so long, and we increasingly see it in commercial organisations, is they've outsourced so much, and they did it a while ago, they have no residual skill or competence in that service integration view. And so, if you like, there's a niche for providers to be able to say, I can coordinate things across these multiple providers. Now, this is where we start to get those organisation boundaries I had in my service management cafe picture. Because every time you've got a boundary between providers, you have to have that kind of negotiation. Are we going to dance together? And how are we going to dance together? Who's going to take the male role? Who's going to take the female role? But you don't, well, you do have internally, but it's much easier to resolve internally than it is when you've got different commercial organisations. So one approach that you increasingly find is, first of all, you need to have a standard way of describing things, and that's where ITIL comes in place. But ITIL is not everything, not the totality of IT. You have things like CMMI for the development side, and increasingly COBIT covers, if you like, the higher level pieces, and we'll come back to that at the end if I have time. And what you can't do is dictate to each of these external providers that you are going to do things exactly the same way in their organisation that you have defined for them. Because part of the reason that they won that contract is because they are competitive in the marketplace and they have their own best practices for that. Sometimes in a contract people do try and impose that, and a classic one is that they try and say everybody should use the same service desk tool that the integrator will provide. But in practice, the network providers will never sign up to that. You're always going to have a focus on what is the interface between each one of these ways of working. And so what the service integrator is doing is focusing on that kind of standard process interface, and as I'll show you in the next chart, standard integration interface to do with the tooling. And a core part of this is always that the integrator is focusing on how do we judge the performance of each of the providers against the objectives that were set in the contract. So one of the things that comes to the fore then is using kind of classic technology that you use for business services. We have a whole set of information of different sorts: monitoring, alerting, CMDBs, user admin, asset discovery, and we need to use an enterprise service bus type approach. There are different weights of enterprise service bus. There are lightweight ones and heavyweight ones, but nevertheless what you can't afford is to have a kind of point-to-point interaction between every provider and those things that you have in-house. So one of the things that is essential here is to build that common base of the technology tower that I had in my original meta model, so that you've got the ability for people to plug in and out as desired. Because one of the so-called benefits of service integration is that the enterprise can switch suppliers in and out when they find a better supplier or when that one is not performing. And if you can't do this kind of plug and play, then you're going to be in difficulty. Okay, let's move on to cloud. So what difference does cloud really make? Well, in some senses it doesn't change things. The core of this is running the production service. So if you like what I talked about in wave one, we have to have reliable technology that delivers the service and does what it says on the tin. What it changes is the relative priority of other aspects of service management, because it now means we need to be much more organised right through from defining a service, offering it to our customer set. Now that might be our internal users, or in the case of a company like my own, offering it to external providers who will then use it as a building block in what they then offer within their enterprise. But whichever level you're at, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, or even business process as a service, and those I think are the four pretty much standard things that we've had since the original American NIST document back in about 2008, which I think you borrowed some of the terms from that.
They submitted theirs and we had a bit of trouble changing it.
It was a very good original definition. There's a lot more focus on what traditionally has been the softer aspect of service management, including, elasticity. Well, you can stretch things and you can shrink things as well. It's just as important to be able to switch things off when they're no longer needed in the cloud world compared with actually taking it on board, because otherwise you're going to continue paying for it. So let's just think about a couple of the challenges here. First one is, okay, so I'm going to take some virtual machine images from an external cloud provider, and I'm going to have a hybrid IT delivery to my organisation. Okay, now I've got a service desk that is a single point of contact to my users. Hang on a minute. So if there's a problem with a virtualized machine I've got from a cloud provider, are they going to call my service desk, or are they going to call the cloud provider's service desk? If they're going to call my service desk, how will my service desk know how to deal with that? You know, it's a non-trivial issue, and it's absolutely one that you need to think about. It comes back to really the point I was trying to make earlier. It's working through that in a not too negative way, so it doesn't sound like you're sort of pouring cold water on things, but people need to understand what is it they get from it. So another example is if I've got a performance slowdown, and it's entirely possible I might have got some kind of platform as a service, some kind of database function from a third-party provider. They might, without you knowing, be using an infrastructure as a service provider to give them their compute, storage, and network. Okay, now am I going to have enough events in my system? Will they be visible to me that I can do that kind of event detection and work out where the problem is? Right. I'm sure there are solutions for it, but it's absolutely non-trivial. And the other one that a colleague was giving me the other day, which is an interesting one, is in the cloud vision, with this proverbial credit card, people could take a virtual machine because they want to fire up a test system, and they could do that this afternoon, and they might need it till Friday, and they'll switch it off. Now, how often do you run a scan to find out what your CIs are and your assets? Well, let's say I do it at the weekend. I won't therefore have any knowledge that I've ever had that resource in my network. Okay, well that's fine, I wasn't managing it, but I'm going to get a bill from that provider, and he's going to say, you had this virtual machine from me for 4 days, and that's going to cost you this much. It's going to be my job, not the user's job, to reconcile their invoice and work out the way it pays the right amount. These are absolutely non-trivial issues. Another one is single sign-on. Right? So let's suppose I've got single sign-on, and I have some database services which I run in-house, and some are externally. Then am I able to propagate my single sign-on across those two things, or does that mean I've got to now educate the users that they're going to have a different sign-on? I was involved in IBM's early evaluation of some of these issues, and we had to produce a kind of adoption model. We did it 5 years ago, and I still think a lot of these issues have not yet been fixed. And part of the reason for that comes to it's a busy chart, it's an architectural picture, and it comes from ETOM. Anyone heard of ETOM? Yeah, what is it?
Frameworks.
I'm sorry?
Frameworks now.
Framework for what?
No, frameworks now. ETOM's the old name. It's moved on.
I say, oh, I beg your pardon, no, thank you, I'm out of date.
Yeah, TM4, yeah.
Yeah,
It's telecoms.
Telecoms have done some really good work and put the IT world to shame in terms of their standardisation. ETOM, or whatever it's called now, was the process view of how telecoms work together. And what I liked was they had an operational support services, which is pretty much, you can't read the detail, but this is more the traditional wave 1 and wave 2 stuff that we're talking about. The business support services are these softer things I was talking about in the previous chart, the offering lifecycle, the contracting, the billing, the metering side. And that's the area that we need to move forward on. The other piece I think we've done badly in IT is, alongside ETOM, whatever it is now, and it's probably changed something, they had a formal data model called SID. How many remember Tell SID? How many are old enough to remember that? So what in the IT world, have a standard definition of what a change request looks like across, from one provider to another? I don't think we do. I think we focused on process for so long that we don't have those other pillars of what we need. ITIL 3 was 2011 was really good in standardising the organisation pillar, but we still haven't really addressed the data side, and then obviously the tooling is a war between all the vendors of different tooling, and my company is as guilty as any in that. But I think what I'm trying to highlight is if you're moving into this cloud world and you've therefore got a whole different time scale, like hours and days rather than months and years, it might totally change the way that you have to think about how do I support this, or do I even bother trying? It comes back to, do I bother writing a user manual, or just do I expect people to understand how it works, which is if you like, the Apple philosophy. Sometimes the users might actually be ahead of us as the new generation comes through, that we don't need to do all the things that we used to do. Okay, so I've probably rabbiting on for too long. To me, those are the challenges thinking about where do we go next with service management, which is why I think there's plenty of career for us as we move forward. So how do we work on this? Well, classic consulting, a 1 to 5 scale. There are loads of models around this, and I missed the recent announcement of the ITSM monitor that ITSM had some broadcasts on. I think they've publicised a new sort of self-assessment tool, a kind of 1 to 5 scale that you can think about. And part of the reason for having this is that usually what we say is you can't jump more than about 1.5 points on this scale in a single go. It's an amount of change for your organisation that you can't adopt. So if you are, you're doing the basic stuff, you do need to be realistic of thinking about, okay, I need to become capable and provide that reliable, predictable service of a fairly guaranteed quality. And it's more than just that one level. It helps, you can't read this, but you'll see it in the charts if you want it. It helps if you split down using pretty much those pillars I had in the earlier meta model. The process foundation is the core definition subject. Execution is the process detail. We need to link with other processes. We have handoffs from one to another, just like that restaurant example I had. We have to make sure the interface between availability and service level management is a good one, for example. So if there's an availability issue, you need to pass that information to the service level management process, because they have the interface with the customer and will do service improvement reviews. And then you've got the organisation, you've got the tooling, and the sort of data area I've got here is the measurement and control piece. It helps to understand the relative strength, whether it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. So simple approaches to work out. You can't bite the whole scope off, whether it's breadth of processes or increasing maturity in a single go. And then, how do you work out what this is worth? Complicated chart I'll explain in a moment. I have the view that you will never have a concrete business case for service management that is provable. It's a bit like an infrastructure decision, like building the Channel Tunnel, or dare I say HS2. There's always going to be an act of faith, and you need to get people along with you. And I think the core to this is a survey that was done quite a long time ago now. I think it was 2003 or something, 2004, by the London School of Economics. And what it was looking at was, what's the benefit of just changing the way that you work, the management practices, or changing the IT capability that supported that? And this is looking at the lowest quartile and the highest quartile in both cases. So if you basically, If you did nothing on either that, then you get no return. If you only put in a new tool and don't modify the way that you work to match what that tool will do for you, you get a small return. You actually get more return if you just focus on doing the essentials, are we meeting the requirements? It's when you combine those together that you get the biggest return. Now, okay, it's sort of an act of faith. I think it's a useful study, and I think that's a good way of trying to convey to people that's what service management is all about. It's not just buying a tool. We all know if you just buy a tool and change your current service desk tool, then you will just confuse people. You have to think about how am I going to work differently, which is the management practices piece. Okay, which brings me, unlike Shirley, I'm not exactly on time. I've overrun. Well, maybe you had a couple of questions. I think I'm close.
We started 5 minutes.
I think I'm close enough to the end of that. That covers what I wanted to say. I've got a couple of charts on COVID, but I don't think I'm going to go to them unless we dry up with questions, and you're particularly interested in seeing, well, how does COVID fit compared with ITIL? So, are there any questions prompted by either of our presentations? Go ahead.
A question you touched on Simon briefly. In your perspective, having seen some of it in the commercial world, is this model being pushed by the government cabinet office a viable model? It's how
The cyanide.
have you seen it being
The project that will take me to Japan next week is an example of that. I was involved with a major bid with a global insurance company last year, which wants to do their own IT, their own service integration. So what we're seeing is a mixture of organisations that recognise this is a core competency. We need to rebuild that strength in-house, compared with those which say, yes, we recognise we need that integration because at the moment we've got vendors pointing to each other and we can't control it. There are both approaches being taken. Probably the most interesting example is General Motors. Anyone heard of what General Motors are doing with their way of managing IT? So General Motors they say they're on their 4th generation of sourcing. So originally they ran things in-house, and then back in 70s they bought EDS and gave EDS all their IT. So EDS was originally a General Motors organisation. They then decided, so EDS was still going out and getting external contracts. I think General Motors decided they had all their eggs in too many baskets. So in 10 years ago, they decided to go the multi-sourcing route with a service integrator. And that worked extremely well for a number of years. And then a new CIO came in and decided, we've lost that core competency. So they announced about 18 months, 2 years ago, a massive recruitment drive in the Detroit area to rebuild that service integration layer, and they have cancelled the service integration contract. We had one of them. They were very happy with what we did, but they decided it was an absolutely core competence that IT is such a fundamental part of the business. They wanted to have the integration in-house. So we're seeing both in-house and external, but in general, the core thing is, do we have that coordination across all the different towers of supply chain, whatever mix of internal and external providers that represents?
But they bring the in-house integration function,
The
not the supplier function.
The individual delivery organisation, whether it's application or operations, they still have outsourced.
What's your view on the supply chain sort of playing nicely together in the delivery of the operation?
Interesting challenge. It's so the enterprise needs to retain supplier management, and that's a core to it. But one of the concepts along with those sort of definitional standard interfaces that the integrator has is it has strengthened the ITIL concept of operational level agreements, because the contract is still between the provider and the enterprise, but the enterprise is delegating day-to-day responsibility to this integrator role who has no contractual power over the providers. And so this project I'm on at the moment, we're in agreeing how the processes are going to work and what the interface points are. The fun comes the next stage of how do you write that in an operational level agreement that the integrator can report back to the enterprise so that they can kick or praise their provider.
Because the issue I see is that the integrator needs to undertake a certain level of provider assurance activity.
Yes, absolutely.
But the challenge is that to really be able to do the operation at a sufficient level of quality, there needs to be a federated view of the configuration data and all this sort of stuff to be shared across all the providers so that they can work together.
Yes,
otherwise you end up with holes in your knowledge management environment.
So a service knowledge management system across all of the providers is essential. You're going to have federated CMDBs, but nevertheless you need to have some kind of consistent CMS across all that in ITIL language. These are all really difficult challenges in a very large organisation. Anyone else? Stunned.
Any more questions for Shirley?
Can you tell us about COVID?
Is there an appetite for five
Do
minutes
you
or
want
so?
us to see 5 minutes of COVID?
Okay, let's
Go on
one of the on the Service Management Specialist Group website, we've got loads of past lectures. One of the ones I did about 3 years ago was I did a review of about 10 different management frameworks, and I'll check the name of it. And one of the ones I looked at was obviously COVID. I looked at ETOM, I looked at CMMI, and so on. You can still find that material, and it's still vaguely current, although the versions of things have changed, and COVID is a good example of that. So let me just move forward. I'm not going to cover ITIL 3. COVID, its origin was from the audit side. It was to do with can the external auditors be happy with that IT is meeting compliance rules and corporate standards. And it fairly quickly grew into adding a whole set of control objectives, and I think that's where it's got its name. So COBIT stands for Control Objectives for IT. And what it in those days it was said, you must be able to show that you have a policy for managing user IDs or something like that. It didn't really give you the processes for dealing with it. Over time, they added that kind of thing. So they had a different origin than ITIL, which was what are the processes you have for managing security, including user accounts. And then COBIT 3 started to become more generalised. COBIT 4 added, well, they published a couple of other separate frameworks called Val-IT for the value. How do we show to the business the value that IT is providing? And they had another framework called Risk IT. What they've done in COBIT 5, which came out in 2012, is put all of that into one single overarching model for the whole of IT. And I'm going to not go through that background. It's, broadly speaking, the headlines for it, they've got something like 45, 50 process areas, but they split it very carefully between governance and management. Who else in the room besides me has trouble whenever anyone talks about governance? What do people mean by governance?
that lady thing that sits on top of
It's a
everything else.
fluffy, what does governance actually do? Well, part of the problem is, and which is why I always ask people, what do you mean by governance? So often people use governance as a synonym for management. And what COVID has clearly differentiated is that governance is all about setting the environment in which you can make proper management decisions, but actually making decisions is a management function. So you need to have that higher level piece to give, the classic thing is the right accountabilities to people and decision-making framework, but it doesn't make the decisions. Right? The decisions are a management function. And so they've got a classic life cycle which matches, if you like, what ITIL has, but is more comprehensive. So for example, ITIL doesn't really cover architecture, it doesn't really cover application development, whereas COVID does cover that full range. And then on top of that, they've got some description of processes and capabilities that you need at that higher level. So the interesting point is that in the marketplace, ITIL has is the de facto standard, and in this company that I'm dealing with, in the operations side, ITIL is the language that is in the contract that we have signed up to. But the workshop we've got next week in Japan is all about the planning side of IT, with corporate IT strategy and planning, and they've adopted COVID. And so I think increasingly what you're going to find is that the earlier stages in the life cycle, well, there's a greater likelihood that COVID will be the language that they use up there. And as you get to the bottom line, you're almost definitely going to have ITIL in place, which is why I think it helps to understand how you can map from one to the other. In most cases, there's a very simple linkage from one to the other. I don't have any more detail than that, but does that give you a sense of...
So that management is part of the COVID?
Yeah, COVID-5 is all of that.
Right.
So they talk about PBRM as being the management pieces. So each of these is decomposed into, I think this one has about 11 processes, and I can't really remember how many each of these other ones has. And they would be interesting points that have a much more structured and multi-dimensional definition of each of the process areas than ITIL does. ITIL has, it has a lot about the goals and objectives, the inputs and outputs and activities, and the organisational side. This one has a lot more linkage to metrics, much more detailed metrics than you find in ITIL. Too much detail. I can't imagine any organisation that would implement everything in COVID. And then a lot more is in their materials about how do you measure where you are on a kind of maturity scale. And it's a lot more consistent in its structure than you'll find in the ITIL books.
In a previous client I was working with, we used COVID to really give you the what you should be doing, and ITIL to give you the how you should.
Yes, and I think that's a fairly good bit. So that's consistent with the what you should be doing is over here, and the how you should be doing is on the right-hand side.
COVID doesn't really give you the low-level process detail that you can get
Yes.
from ITIL books.
Yes.
And then ITIL doesn't tell you really what you should be doing, but it does tell you how.
And that's why I think they can be complementary, or you can get lost in management frameworks if you're not careful.
I think it helps if you want to have a look, is to just look at some of the DSS ones. So DSS02 is Service Request and Incident Management. So look at something you're familiar with, and that helps you to start to understand it.
Right, that's as much as I plan to say on COVID, and I think it's
Right,
I should
okay.
step down at that point.
So just, so thanks to Chris and Shirley for two really interesting and enjoyable presentations. They were really great. Next week we've got
John McDermott and Daniel Preston, and I'm sure they're going to be really good as well. I won't be here next week, but Dinos will be chairing the show. So hope to see you all next week. And then